Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Sarah Diehn. I'm the digital news editor and staff writer for the Des Moines Business Record. I've had the opportunity to cover innovation and entrepreneurship for the last 3 years through our weekly Innovation Iowa newsletter, annual Innovation Iowa magazine, and other Business Record products. I'd like to welcome you to this special coverage that is a part of the 2024 Innovation Iowa magazine content, which is out now. We're trying out a new story format to give readers a chance to hear a story directly from the people involved. Today, I'm joined by the members of the Central Iowa Entrepreneurship Coalition, or ESHIP-Co for short. The folks here today were part of the group that represented Central Iowa in the Regional Entrepreneurship Acceleration Program held by the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, also known as MIT REAP. MIT REAP is a global initiative that uses frameworks designed by the university to help assess the strengths and weaknesses of their entrepreneurial ecosystems, as well as define goals, action steps, and a vision for the future. When the two-year program concluded recently, ESHIP-Co was formed to continue the work to retain and grow entrepreneurship in the Central Iowa region. The group has identified 3 specific focus areas, each with its own subcommittee. The focus areas are broadening risk capital, changing the cultural perception of entrepreneurship, and increasing corporate engagement with the entrepreneurial community. In this conversation, we'll go deeper on each of these areas and learn more about how ESHIP-Co got started. So let's get started and meet our group. With us today, we have Tej Dewan, Managing Director and Co-founder of Plains Angels, Ann McMahon, Statewide SBIR STTR Program Coordinator at BioConnect Iowa, Nedelia Gomez, Chief Technology Officer of the Precision Ag Platform at Iowa State University, Allison Doyle, Associate Director of the Iowa State University Research Park, Diana Wright, Startup Community Builder at the Greater Des Moines Partnership, and the 6th member of ESHIP-Co who was unfortunately not able to be here today is Megan Brandt, Director of Maple Studios. Thank you all so much for being here today. I'd like to start by having you all go around and just briefly share what your specific role is within ESHIP-Co. Tej, could we start with you?
Certainly. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, team. This is a fantastic afternoon to talk all things entrepreneurship. My role is a volunteer on the Risk Capital Committee. So Risk Capital's core goal is to identify and expand opportunities for early stage risk capital in and around our community. And then wherever gaps exist, connecting entrepreneurs to available risk capital from within the region, beyond Iowa's borders, or elsewhere.
So, Allison, can we go to you?
Sure. I'm Allison Doyle, and I'm part of the corporate engagement and entrepreneurship team. And we see our role as connecting corporates up with startup companies and vice versa. As far as the push or the impetus for this group is concerned, I mean, this emerged pretty early on in our conversations with MIT REAP as a need and a focus area. And the feeling was that the research park where I sit every day is a really nice model for how this has occurred serendipitously over time, and that there are probably many best practices and ways that we can lean into as part of the greater community to help others find some of the success, whether they're here or not.
Awesome. Ann?
Yes, absolutely. Good afternoon. And thank you for your time and attention, Sarah, and the Business Record to bringing this to the forefront of innovation in the great state of Iowa. I hold a few different roles on MIT REAP, now ESHIP Coalition. I'm a co-chair along with Tej. She did not mention that, but Tej and I are co-chairs of the new version 2.0, as well as government. With my role in the public-private partnership at BioConnect Iowa, I run a government or early stage federal program trying to get some early money and federal funding to early stage innovators. And so I sit in the government seat.
Awesome. Nedelia?
Hello, my name is Nedelia Gomez, and I am a partner with Allison on the corporate engagement side. And in my role currently, I bring together the university component, the academic component, into the ESHIP coalition efforts.
Awesome. And Diana?
Hello, yes. So Diana Wright here at the Greater Des Moines Partnership. I had the lucky chance to really kind of spearhead this group over the last 2 years. So being a team champion, I believe, is that role. And that was, anywhere from making sure we showed up to the workshops in Boston or Australia, also making sure we got the projects done that we said we were going to do. So I'm really excited because I know now it's summer, it's 2 years past. And this small but mighty team of doers, we've already accomplished, 5 or 6 different projects that we haven't really released yet to the public. But it just goes to show, I think our team, and now expanding our team of members, we've all been about doing and getting things done together. And I think the public is going to be really excited to hear about that. So
awesome. And Diana, I wanted to kind of give the next question to you as well. For anyone who's watching who isn't familiar with the MIT REAP effort, can you give a recap of the purpose of the program and maybe a few of the frameworks that Central Iowa was able to develop as a participant?
Yeah, so really quickly, we were part of a eight different country cohort. So, but with a bunch of Midwest cities. And so quickly, early on, when we were forming this team, we chose to make sure it was Des Moines and Ames in Central Iowa. So that's kind of where we're focused, but it doesn't mean, that our efforts don't expand into all across the state, but also like connecting into our peer sister states too. So our kind of focus is, what are we doing as a region that actually either retains or grows startups here in Central Iowa? That was really our overarching question that we thought about. And that's kind of then what led us to develop the 3 different areas of focus that you just briefly shared. And as far as the frameworks at MIT, they really focus on a 5 stakeholder model. So you've heard like Anne, she is part of a government stakeholder hat. We have our universities represented between Adelia, Allison, and other members with Iowa State. We have the entrepreneurs, they have to be part of it, risk capital, and then corporate stakeholders as well. So that's kind of at least the stakeholder model that they really set us up with, and we made sure we had people representing those hats. And then the other overarching thing with MIT is that, they made us kind of quickly understand that no one owns entrepreneurship in our community. And even nationwide and even globally, right? So that, is really humbling. And I think it's actually allowed our group to work better together. Knowing that not one entity in our team represents and is the all for entrepreneurship, but then it also helps us expand into now what is the eShip Co.
Yeah. And I know you talked just a little bit about how one sort of easily, the MIT REAP work easily transitioned into the eShip Co. But can you talk a little bit about just why you felt that transition was necessary? And, Anne and Tej as co-chairs, if you want to weigh in on sort of just that overall vision and what you all hope to work on achieving through eShip Co.
Yeah, I could start. So I mean, one, not all the work is done. So that's why we need to continue and making sure that, 12 people's 2-year investment of time. And then of course, the people that help fund this program, which is Kauffman Foundation, making sure that didn't just end. So I mentioned, we have achieved about 5 different community projects related to entrepreneurship, but we have about 20 total. And so, one, that's ambitious, but it means that, in this next year, and as we also expand our team, that we're really focused on specific kind of key KPIs, key performance indicators within these 3 different areas. And so it's important to continue the work. And so part of that is we've created this coalition. It is kind of an extension. Right now, it fits under the Greater Des Moines Partnership as like a doer advisory council. And we're excited to kind of grow that, but that's certainly why we're still going. There's still things to be solved.
Awesome. Anne and Tej, is there anything you would weigh in on as far as vision that you have as co-chairs of this group?
I'll go first. Sure. Thank you, Sarah. I think I did a great job, and our team of 12 originals. I'm really proud of the framework that we have put out and laid out in the 3 of the several must-win battles that we have. We got very overambitious, and MIT faculty were like, pick one. So we, as strong and bold Iowans, landed on 3, and I think those 3 make sense, and they make sense together. And so I'm looking forward to widening the tent carefully, but widening the tent and trying to bring in some new blood and some new flavor to see how we can continue that framework smart and within specific actions.
Absolutely.
I would add that if you were to go back and look at some of the similar stories that your colleagues wrote in the business record 15 years ago, the vision around entrepreneurship was never about a task to be done. It was about a continual window that's a 20-year rolling window. People will come and go, but the strategy has to continue rolling forward 20 years from then, whatever then is. So if you look back to 2010, I'm the only remaining member of that original cohort who would have been talking about these topics then. Of the 7 of us on this call right now, who will be here in 2039 talking about some of these topics, and who will replace us? So things have to be in a long-term continual horizon. It cannot just be a single tactic, single strategy that gets done and people dissipate. So it was natural for us to not graduate and be done in December of 23, but to say who can continue, who has to be replaced, who is self-selecting up. We have to go through all of those questions, and so keeping the continual cycle running was important to us, which is why we're up here.
Awesome. Great. Well, I think I will move into some of the questions where we can now dive into each of those like focus areas a little bit deeper individually. So starting with risk capital, and Anne will need to leave us in a few minutes. So I'm going to throw a question to her first so that she gets a chance to weigh in on the topic of broadening risk capital and that work. So Anne, as someone, as you said, in your government seat and working with businesses to obtain research funds and work with them on their path to commercialization, can you talk about ways that you see opportunities you see for leveraging existing resources, and where you maybe see the most opportunity to bring in new funding avenues or opportunities for Iowa's entrepreneurs?
Sure, I'll give you my best stab at this. So I work with really early stage innovative researchers. Some of them are just out of the lab, two or three people tinkering and building very bleeding edge innovative products, and they haven't even started a company. And so I think taking a deep breath and starting at square one, start your company so we can start filling the resources there. I also think that several resources at the same time are always a plus. So my funding is very competitive and long-term. So that's competitive and long-term. I have them look at other sources like state funding, VentureNet Iowa runs the continuum of funding there and 4 different buckets there. So I try to say you can use that money for something more specific and it comes to you faster, as well as if you're ready to take on angel investing. Plains Angels is a great place to start. Plus, I know who to connect them to there, as well as we in BioConnect Iowa run InnoVenture Iowa, which is the state's first and pretty large co-investment fund. So we've got a couple avenues there. I'm most excited for the opportunities to come. Some of those require a match or a first term on there. And so I'm excited for some of this funding and broadening the risk capital to help people obtain those matching dollars that were initially a hurdle before they can obtain some of those other financial resources.
Got it. Are there any other major needs that you feel like you see from your role in the risk capital area?
Yeah, a lot of it's education as well. There's a lot of funding out there and a lot of different sources of funding, and people don't necessarily know that they're different, non-dilutive, which is my world, which is in theory free money. You just pay for it with a lot of time and pulling your hair out, but versus the dilutive money where once someone owns a percentage of your company, they own more of you than you may like or even know about. So I think just educating early and often about the different types and when which type is appropriate, depending on what you're building and how you're building it and when, and what your end goal is. Is it more Main Street lifestyle? You're just going to have a wonderful shop or art gallery for us to peruse on the weekend and bring our friends and family? Or do you want to do more of a scalable, innovative company to sell it or to merge or to move on to your next great idea?
Yeah, great. Well, and Tej is the co-chair, the chair of this subcommittee. So Tej, can you talk a little bit about what you see as some of the more specific goals or needs that you would like eShipCo to work on addressing within risk capital?
Sure. So we literally have an ecosystem of risk capital resources that both exist but need to be built up further. So at the time of this recording, I'm just coming out of a meeting of Plains Angels, which is an angel investor network, one of several in the state of Iowa. So coming out of that meeting where one extremely early stage entrepreneur had just presented, and another who has a product beginning to be in the market, leverage the IEDA funds already, and so on. Now, in both of those cases, they have needs for capital that's considered risk capital in that it's not a traditional bank loan product.
Mm-hmm.
There are angels who will write small checks or big checks. But as we were talking to those two funders, we introduced them to the state funds, so IEDA funding, innoventure funding. And when they didn't know enough about it, we took the time in that meeting to inform them just a little bit more as to what they could do. So it's expanding the circle, right? It's not just us who are taking dilutive capital, to Ann's point earlier, resistant to the founder having non-dilutive capital. We actually like that the state is a partner in that. We like that other angel networks like Fin Capital, who will receive these very presentation recordings from Plains Angels today, will also have an opportunity to review from their perspective. That said, we also look at capital as something that should be used to grow the company. So one of my natural questions for one of the founders presenting was, why does that founder believe that Iowa is the right place to build that company? Is either coast a better place for them to build a company? The reason is the right acceleration in entrepreneurship can happen elsewhere when the founders boomerang back also. So sometimes we can limit the growth of a company in a specific place. So thinking about it from the founder's perspective rather than the money perspective can also make a difference. What we're missing, the gap in this particular scenario is because there wasn't a formal angel network or a formal venture network within the state of Iowa like it has been on either coast. We have tons of pockets of these small angel groups. So what we're actively trying to do is now connecting those 3, 4, 5, 10 person angel groups that exist in various communities and investment clubs and say, join, look at us and say, can you get a broader access to entrepreneurs who are trying to build that you may not have otherwise even known about? So we're trying to bridge that gap in connecting, and that's where we probably need the most help with this.
Got it. And in that work, what do you think, how with your fellow, like with this group being, interdisciplinary and you have all of the stakeholders represented, what does it look like to have their input, and what kind of role do the other stakeholders have in supporting that work?
So if you, I know Sarah, you've looked at this, but if you were to view this pentagram of the 5 resource types,
Mm-hmm.
the 5 resource types are not islands. They are connected not just in a ring around the 5, but also to each other. So if you were to look at risk capital connected to government, even in my conversation today, angel investors, very capitalistic, very dilutive capital related, we're talking about non-dilutive capital from the government. Similarly, there are cases when we would be talking about technology transfer between universities and the entrepreneurs. So it's that interconnected nature
Mm-hmm.
multiplies the value. I don't even know what the permutation multiplier is. Nadelia could probably figure that out faster than I can. But it's not just a ring, it is a connection between the 5 points of the pentagram.
Got it. Are there any other thoughts about risk capital that anyone would like to share?
Yeah, there is one thing we are really excited about, not ready to fully announce yet, but we are really excited about one additional entity that is stepping up to help create matching capital resources. So Iowa Economic Development Authority has a fantastic program around that's truly unmatched in most of the country, from proof of commercial relevance to much further evolved stages of an entrepreneur's journey. All of them require a certain level of private capital to match those public funds. We used to have a really good source of those matching funds that expired a few years ago. At this moment in time, a new entity is stepping up and building a fund to be announced in due time. But that's what we are super excited about, and finding ways to support it whichever way we can.
Absolutely.
I would
Any
add,
other? Go ahead.
yeah, I would add too. So like when we talk about like some of the projects we've already achieved, there's been quite a bit of action in this broadening risk capital. And so some of those pieces are, establishing a rolling fund, which I know was through Plains Angels, which allows more angel investors to come onto a fund and investing together. And then likewise, we have the Iowa Angel Investor Summit, kind of now on year 3 eventually this fall. And that's really to go back to that education component. Just as you need that for the entrepreneur, you also need to educate people that are really new to investing into small businesses, startups, and entrepreneurs. So, so that's been 2 of the big wins kind of coming out of this risk capital area. And Tej mentioned, this matching fund partner that we're in progress right now. We're also in progress of bringing back a accelerator funded program to the state of Iowa. So we're really excited about kind of accomplishing some of these by the end of 2024, hopefully here.
Great. All right. And now we can move into talking a little bit more about the second focus area, the changing cultural perception of entrepreneurship. And Megan Brandt of Maple Studios is the chair of this subcommittee. I would like to start by maybe just putting that phrase, the perception of the cultural perception of entrepreneurship, into a little more context, and maybe what was learned about this from the experience in MIT REAP, and why this was specifically identified as a need in the Central Iowa region. Anyone feel free to jump in.
I'll share an experience that I had during the program.
Yeah.
Diana mentioned that there were representatives from different countries. And all of us had a slightly different perception about entrepreneurship. In one of the groups, the general understanding of it is different fancier word for unemployment. you're somewhere in the middle of, you don't have a clue what you're doing and you want to be rich. I mean, it was really interesting to me how the cultural elements of how we support risk-taking, creating or driving your own business varied from one country to another, from one team to another, and even from various stakeholders within the same team. That was very interesting and made me think deeply about my own experiences in Iowa, in other states, in other countries, and getting that sense of what makes an environment, a community, strong to sustain this risk-seeking, self-motivated individual that becomes an entrepreneur. So that's all that I'm going to share in terms of what the cultural perspective means, and my own experience coming to it and hearing from so many different voices what it means to them.
Mm-hmm.
Something that I would throw out, and it may seem at the offset that I'm not going to answer your question, but I'll come around to it. And One of the things that I think is an inherent strength of our MIT team, and now the team that's chosen to move forward with the work, is this regional approach where Ames and Des Moines were linked together. And I don't know if this was originally Diana's idea to do this or where it came from. I'm assuming that it probably was because Diana used to work at Iowa State and now is with the Des Moines Partnership in her day job. But there's been a history and a tradition in this state where we don't have a very large population at all, where Ames is one island and Des Moines is this other island. And I don't know why or how it all came to be, but it's almost like there were like these competing forces. And there's a recognition and a realization that in a state this small, in an entrepreneurial community that needs leverage because there's frankly not enough people starting these sorts of companies, that if we don't band together when we're frankly 30 minutes away from one another, that we're never going to get anywhere. And one of the first things that kept popping up repeatedly when we started having these framework discussions was, well, that exists. Well, this exists. Well, we already tried this. Well, this is here and that's there. And then everybody's sitting around the room so frustrated, like, but where do you go to learn about all these things? And what's the shared platform? And then interestingly enough, Jeff Wood is one of the people who was also on our team, and he's very deeply rooted in the journalistic community. And he's saying, like, I don't have time to do Clay and Milk anymore, the publication that he had. And so where's the spot and what's the thing that links all these stories together? And when you couple that with the fact that we're from Iowa and we're inherently humble and that bragging about things. Okay, sorry about that. So I was just saying that it seems like a really simplistic thing from the offset to have this be one of our three platforms, but I believe it is probably the most important one in terms of storytelling, making sure that we're all aware of what the right hand and the left hand are communicating, and then celebrating the wins and showcasing for the rest of the world what's here.
Mhm. Right, that culture, that's sort of a foundation. Yeah, that makes sense. And I'm curious about what any thoughts on, what you all feel are maybe some factors or forces that kind of shape what Iowa's, or Central Iowa's at least, current perception of entrepreneurship is.
That's a loaded question.
Yeah.
I think it depends on who you ask, honestly.
Mhm.
And I don't mean to be trite at all, but I think that there's just a large number of people in our state that don't care, and they don't know that they need to care or that they should care. I mean, we have very low unemployment as a state, and this is not a place where you necessarily grow up thinking like, I'm going to start a company. And the new generation, the people that are younger than all of us that are here on this call, like they think that way. And we're infusing some of that curriculum in the fabric of what's happening at Iowa State, even because we think it's important to have this innovation mindset. But I never once went through any of my experiences thinking like I should go out and seek or aspire to be an entrepreneur. In fact, in my family, it was quite the opposite. It was you take the steady job that has good benefits and you be a good employee for a long time and you don't jump around, right? That's sort of more the Iowa traditional way. And so without working together, I don't think we're ever going to get there.
Yet
Yeah.
at the same time, if you think about the makeup of the state of Iowa, we even though it's no longer true, we do say ag is our primary industry. Every farmer is an entrepreneur.
Yes.
If you
The
think
original
about,
innovator.
yeah, any small business entrepreneurs, the history of employment, benefits driven employment, is literally only 80 years old in the country, let alone Iowa. So what we have to do is through that education that that was mentioned earlier by Anne, through the education is to re-normalize the history and the facts about entrepreneurship. Now, one of the things MIT focused on quite a bit was innovation-driven entrepreneurship versus all other entrepreneurship. So innovation driven, patent driven, technology transfer driven, those kinds of things that are considered to be high risk, high reward businesses are different than those that afford a self-driven lifestyle, which is where farming falls, retail falls, small business falls, all of that. Those are amazing places. We just have to think about which of those two pathways are we willing to sit and focus on and accelerate.
I
We
want to,
as sorry, Nadia, one more second. We felt that where we had our strengths was in those innovation-driven entrepreneurship. That doesn't mean the other is less important. It's just that we didn't have it. The moment we have the right people, we can just actually hand them that playbook and say, we are here to support you whichever way we can. We just don't have any skills in that as this team. Sorry, Nadia, all yours.
no, that's great. I think there's so many factors that we can go into. One that I actually think is quite interesting, specifically in the ag industry area, which is what Tej was talking about, the relationship of ag and our region. And it has been seen as well in other industries, but is the fact that we are very successful already at it. And so we get better and better and better at doing what we already know what to do. And that is a path of certainty and a path of progress and productivity that we value. It's not a bad thing, but in the journey of doing that, it becomes harder to try something riskier or try something different because we have already optimized the path of success of something that we do really, really well. And so I am intrigued. My origin story is in agriculture. It is not in entrepreneurship, but noticing that there are so many things that are changing, from consumer demands to regulatory, global issues, climate. I mean, there's so many things changing that requires innovation to spark again, for us to be able to think in a high risk method so that we have the solutions that we need for the next 10, 20 years. And we have been incredibly successful with ag over the last 100 and something years. And so we're good at it. So I think it's not all bad that we encounter these factors. I think it's phenomenal that we're bringing people together to say, yes, we are good at this. We do well X, B, A, B, and C, but we need to do differently X, Y, and Z. So my thought is it's maybe just a phase. Maybe it's just the timing and the right critical mass to be able to make it happen.
Yeah, and I can kind of chime in too. Like, I was definitely part of this committee with cultural perception. And that's also another way of framing it is like, do people see entrepreneurship as a choice, as a career choice? And so, you know, what kind of got us to this point is that Kaufman has some great data around the new rate of entrepreneurs starting in your state. And Iowa had a pretty low rate, even compared to Nebraska, Minnesota, you know, our Illinois, and just different areas of the Midwest or Heartland region. And so that's kind of why we specifically did draw upon, like, okay, there's a cultural perception thing happening. And as everyone's mentioned on this call, you can kind of get a lot of different pieces because it is personal, but it's also how does the whole group think when it comes to entrepreneurship, and why do people care? As to Allison said, why should corporates care? Why does government care? Why should risk investors or you know, even just organizations care? And that can be a challenge, honestly, for a lot of us, I think, that have been part of this group. So some wins, though, that we have had in this area. You know, one of the things was identifying a online resource map so that people can, instead of like knowing one of us, which means you have to have a personal connection, not everyone does. And we want to make that accessible and also equitable. And so, you know, right now there's a resource map or resource compass where you can find a lot of these resources that exist in Central Iowa as you're starting your journey as an entrepreneur. And hopefully better than Google, but it's like, you know, imagine Google, but just for Central Iowa and Iowa resources. Another big win was, I know the Business Record, you guys last year did your Innovation Iowa magazine, all in the framework of these 5 stakeholders and telling stories in that lens, which is really, really powerful. Is something we were actually really proud to bring back to Boston and MIT to show the faculty there. And then some ongoing work. We have been doing the Iowa Innovation Dashboard that is collecting the different data around the state in these kind of key metrics. And then also thinking about how do we celebrate and tell these stories. So last year, there was a campaign, a marketing campaign launched around entrepreneurship happens here, and that's in the region. And it goes to kind of the point of entrepreneurs are all around you. You just need to look for them. So we're really excited about kind of working on these projects. And then the last one is always hosting consistent events in the entrepreneur community. And, you know, as this groups get bigger, but also as we all might continue on to another thing, you know, 20 years from now, who is going to be putting on those events and making sure that still exists?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And Diana, another question on that topic of just, as everyone said, it's personal and it means different things it can mean the perceptions can be different to different people. So is there a mindset that this specific committee is kind of approaching things with, as far as how you might measure change, or just, you know, what kind of factors you're looking at when you're saying, you know, how do we know change has happened? Or and that's looking at that sort of results. I know that might be a little bit ways down the road, but how are you at least thinking about that as this group, you know, gets up and going?
Yeah, measuring cultural behavior is really hard.
Yeah.
It takes actually a lot of money to measure, like if in a qualitative survey.
Mm-hmm.
We have talked about that, but I think the data point that we're really focused on is the new rate of entrepreneurs. Are we seeing that needle move? Based on, it's not going to just be the work that we do. Like, we cannot claim the ownership of, you know, because of this marketing campaign, it moved this needle, but we are trying to really within this group define like what are we trying to do and how will that be measured, so that we know it's either making a difference or it's not, and that's okay if it's not, but then kind of going back and trying to figure that out. I don't know if anyone else would add something on that.
I'll add one, Diana. You had great thoughts there. I think one way to know success has happened is if one of these problems gets solved by somebody who's not a part of this team and becomes a sustainable running entity. We don't have to own it. We are not the CEOs of the entrepreneurial community in Central Iowa. So if a venture begins and starts running, that is a marker of success. And we're actually beginning to notice some of that in the Omaha Lincoln cohort. That group, which looked a lot like our group when it comes down to it, and had a lot of synergy with us over the last 15 years, is on a similar journey, but they're creating different things to see what sticks, what runs, what finds sustainability. So we're also looking at other members of our cohort and saying, what is somebody else doing that is sticking?
Yeah, awesome. All right, well, I'm going to move into the third focus area, the corporate engagement with the entrepreneurial community, which Nadelia and Allison are co-chairs of that committee. So Nadelia and Allison, one or both of you, could you give a little bit of background on why this was specifically identified from the work that was done during MIT REAP? Why was this identified as an area of need in the Central Iowa ecosystem? And yeah, just what you might have experiences you might have from your role with corporate engagement.
One of the very early assignments that we had in this team was to go and interview entrepreneurs and go and interview various stakeholders in this ecosystem. And one of the things that we heard from all of those interviewed individuals is that they want to be on the know. They want to be in the know. They want to know what new trends are happening, what's in innovation. I hear something from a technology perspective. How is that going to apply to my business now? How is it going to change? Corporates are seeking these trends, and startups are also looking for these trends for different reasons, but they're all trying to find those trends and exchange ideas on best practices. And it just seemed like if there was a demand for this, and we had a community that was willing to exchange these ideas, that we would be serving a need, we would be meeting a need that our ecosystem needed at that time. So I remember the interviews, and a lot of the reason why corporate engagement was identified as one of the must-win battles has to do with the readiness of the people that we talk to and the activities that were already in scope that had indicated that we wanted that type of engagement to occur between corporates and startups.
Awesome. Allison, anything you would add?
Yeah, I think I mentioned earlier that I'm appointed at the research park just because of the seat that I get to sit in during my day job as being a place to look at for some lessons learned. And we have a nice nucleus of international large companies here at the research park that have acquired one of our startups and continued their operations here. And then we also have a nice handful of Iowa-based companies, traditionally manufacturing companies located in the rural parts of the state that have locations here as well. And they're here, one, for talent, but also in a lot of cases because they're in need of automation solutions or innovation solutions as they look to how are we going to keep these operations going in the next generation. Lots of times in rural parts of the state where they know there aren't going to be more people because the people that were there are moving to the more populated areas and things. So in addition to these talent hub locations, a lot of these innovation facilities, I guess, have popped up here. And then on top of that, I'm hearing from all of our friends in Des Moines that some of the large corporates down there are engaging in, skunkworks operations within their four walls of their company to try to figure out innovation. And Tej leads a team at Principal that is working on innovation. And so it just seems like these are sort of popping up organically in all of these places, but yet there still is a bit of a disconnect in how to do this. And then all of the people who are in the seat and the corporates that are driving the bus, how they're connecting with the other folks, how they're getting in front of startups, learning how to be the first customer or even be advisors as they look at their go-to-market strategy. And I feel like the group of people that we had were really uniquely positioned to bring more of that serendipity together.
Allison, that's a great point. One of the greatest criticisms lobbed at the Global Insurance Accelerator at its launch was that how could you have 7 companies, some of whom were competitors of each other, launch an accelerator for insurance startups? But I think one of the core reasons for GIA's success is precisely that several industry partners came together and said, how do we set our differences aside, but elevate an industry as a whole? And so, with nearly double the number of investors from then later, the GIA has proven that our corporate community continues to be good corporate citizens within our environment. It's not just represented in Bravo for the arts. It's not just represented in the partnership for our commercial focus elements, but other places also. Others outside our region have recognized the strength that our corporates bring to the table, and they are trying to sell the services that if you let us in your doors, we can help you connect to entrepreneurs. The challenge is we know many of these individuals, we know these entrepreneurs, we can actually make these connections almost quicker and better without taking a slice off the table. We're not in here for finder's fees, right? So what we are finding is that many of these entities with entrepreneurial goals within our corporate environments are actually willing to talk to each other and learn from each other. So a small skunkworks group began slightly separate from this coalition and is beginning to pick up steam, where they are learning from each other across multiple industries already. So 6 industries represented in this group. As it grows, if they are willing to take in the other 30 people that I know has on our list, the magic will have a multiplying effect. And what we need to do is leverage the very corporates that are on Allison's and Nadelia's campus, in the various downtowns between Ames and Des Moines, but also along the way in Ankeny and other places, and say, extend the reach. And if you learn from each other, you can actually have a multiplying effect on this community. So we're actively trying to foster that. We're not trying to lead it, but foster.
And if you think about corporates having a strategic vision for their products and services and business moving forward, at the end of the day, they are also primary places for hiring individuals. And the next generation of folks want to passionately be connected to a purpose, a mission, and the innovation space that's happening. So I know corporates that are going to increase their positioning as being innovative if they're offering opportunities for their employees to be interacting and mentoring with startups. And that energy brings back into the corporate the alternative thinking of entrepreneurship, saying, how can we do this more frugally? How can we do this more effectively? How can we do this more efficiently? And I think there's something to win there that goes beyond just an individual corporate. You've got talent that is moving across these systems and exchanging ideas to become a better state, a better region. So I think there's a lot of reasons why corporates and startups that at the very beginning might seem to be talking in two different languages could find places where they can connect and meet each other's needs and help each other grow.
Yeah. And I would say the last major connection that maybe most people forget, that is very humbling when you are talking to corporates, is that every corporation started with an idea and with a founder or an entrepreneur. So when I work with entrepreneurs and I make sure that they're aware of that when they go in to talk to, name whatever big company or what seems really big to them at the time, because they're just one or two people, it's kind of remembering to kind of level set that. And it's especially hard to do when you're talking with a corporate that maybe doesn't have the founder part of that story anymore. But reminding them too, when you're in that room, like, I don't want to give out any company names, but, kind of doing the research of knowing who was that founder that started that company, what was their history, and how many years have they been around. And so I think that's just a really critical connection. And it just goes to the point of why actually corporate startups and entrepreneurs are already connected. And it's why we're focusing also on this effort.
Mm-hmm. Tej, you mentioned skunk works groups. Can you give a definition of that for anyone who may not be familiar, and maybe from your time in a corporate role, can you talk a little bit about just maybe some initiatives that you've seen and how they've connected with the entrepreneurial community?
Skunkworks, by its very definition, is something you try maybe in a parallel path or even a distant path from a core product line, and try to develop something that's new and innovative, with disruptive possibly to your industry. All of those cool entrepreneurship words aside, it is an attempt to see what is an art of the possible. What can happen if we just try something different? So some of the skunkworks projects that were ridiculed at first, 1994, Microsoft Bob was a skunkworks project, which was a little conversation that came up with a desktop that looked like a regular desk. Today we take it for granted, but at that point it was ridiculed. Similarly with Apple's Newton, the touchpad and the portable device was a skunkworks item. I think the other ridiculed item like Google Glass as a skunkworks item, ridiculed, decommissioned, will probably have a comeback in some other form or fashion, maybe even a decade from now. I would think the business publications, DSM magazine, was a skunkworks item not so long ago, or even Innovation Iowa magazine that Catherine Harrington, tried to talk about innovation a decade too soon, probably. But your publication has had so much of this Skunkworks philosophy that you've tested different products. Every one of those items is a test that's hopefully 10% succeed. Looks like you have a better hit rate than the rest of the industry. So Connie's got something magical amongst her team.
I do
Well-
have to add that even in the terminologies that we utilize, sometimes we can see reflected a little bit about our culture, our apprehension towards risk-taking, or what disobedience looks like if you kind of deviate from this is really where your head should be at. This is really where your 100% effort should be at. And so therefore this is going to be skunk work, right? Like maybe if we start to embrace the idea that we are all part of this generation and regeneration of ideas in order to solve big problems, the skunk work becomes part of our system. We need an arm, a branch, a segment that is looking for that risky stuff, and we'll fail a lot. But in that process, we'll develop the right skill sets, the muscles, the networks that will allow us to be adaptive and adapted to new scenarios in the future. So I think the definition is pretty much something that happens under in kind of a hidden spot. Hopefully one of our cultural metrics might be to say, celebrate those innovative ideas that we're testing and trying in different scales and different manners, and then trying to get more people to think that way.
Go
ahead.
We have to be ready with Skunkworks philosophy. We have to be ready to allow ideas that fail a test or 2 or 10 to just be euthanized or set aside. If we don't, then we're truly not looking for disruption. We're just looking for predictable outcomes. So oftentimes, even in risk capital conversations, what I say is, out of every 100 deals we invest in, 85 will fail to bankruptcy. If we follow that type of an acceptance of failing a test, we are actually investing for disruption. If we're looking for 100 out of 100 to make revenue and profit, we're simply following a blueprint to just have consistent general growth, nominal growth, I should say.
I know there's a country that I can't recall which country it was that we learned about while at MIT that has a national day of failure, where the cities and the government and the country celebrates failure in the sense of, you tried something and likely, a business and maybe it did fail. But actually kind of celebrating that in a different sense, because kind of going back to that cultural perception, that's another thing that came up talking to entrepreneurs is like, when there are sometimes those really hard things that happen or that they have to choose, and how do you make them feel okay after, and to do it again? Because the whole point of how do you grow more startups, a lot of times it's one entrepreneur, and sometimes they're building multiple businesses, and they might need those failures to happen. So that's kind of another thing that came about, and I can't remember what country that was, but it was pretty cool.
Yeah, well, it seems like there is that tie-in with the cultural perception as far as, I think I've had maybe with somebody on this call, but a conversation about just the larger corporate company sometimes wants what the small company has and vice versa. So, some of that seems like it's a little bit of a mindset of what to expect from one another. Is that an element of kind of the work that the corporate engagement work that eShipCo will be doing, Nedelia or Allison or anyone? Is that kind of an element that you're thinking about or thinking about ways to put into action at all?
Yes,
I sure hope so.
Yeah, no,
Yes.
absolutely. And it's a really interesting thing. When we are trying to create partnerships that are going to benefit both corporates and startups, we need to enter into that space knowing that what is beneficial to one might not necessarily be that important to the other, but some other aspect would be. And setting those expectations from the very beginning, understanding where that partner is coming from, can lead to more effective partnerships. So having those conversations, I think, is definitely within the scope of corporate engagement. One of the activities that we did while we were in one of our workshops in Boston, we generally stuck to our country or regions group. So we were all, this team would be working together. But now and then we would split off into stakeholder groups. So I would be with university folks from the other countries, and Tej would be with risk capital people from other countries. And what we've started to realize is sometimes we enter into certain norms or expectations about what that stakeholder group believes in, and we see the world only through our eyes. I have had the opportunity to be in the middle of corporate and startup worlds in the agricultural technology space. And what is interesting to me is that so much more is gained from stepping outside of that box of where you are at as a stakeholder and trying to see how can the parts be greater than the sum of their parts. So the total amount of what we end up doing is more important, more impactful when corporate engagement can understand where the individual partners are starting from. And setting that expectation, learning about each other, is definitely key to some of the activities that corporate engagement committee will be working on.
You know, Nadelia, I smiled when you started on this thread because I thought you were going to go somewhere really fun, because this was one of our super fun exercises. And Sarah, I can totally imagine one of your innovation Iowa rooms with 100 people, breaking up into 5 different cohorts.
Mhm.
We shared openly what each group's frustrations were with the other. And the reality that comes out after the first few minutes of discomfort is mind-boggling. It is amazing to see how disparate those frustrations are, and the recognition on part of the frustrated and the opposite side are just amazing to look at. And what you get out of that is an appreciation for what your solution is missing. So in my case, from a risk capital perspective, what I was getting was timing, response. Basic human traits that should be in any conversation were missing. I know that because I see that, I live that, right? So I have a feeling the government, the university, the entrepreneurs, everybody had very similar outputs. I think this group would love to help you put that together.
Yes, let's do it. That would be great.
It would be a crazy view to see if we could get the leaders from each of these 5 areas in 5 corners talking about the other person, never talking about themselves, talking about the other person.
And it reinforces the idea, right, that we go back to what Diana said. Nobody owns this. Nobody is single-handedly going to make it happen. No region can succeed with only 2 out of the 5 of these stakeholder groups. Like, it's about really understanding what role can you play. And these stakeholder groups are ultimately made up by people. And just like Diana lived in Ames and then in Des Moines, and just like some of us started in academia and then went to corporate and then dabbled in startups, the fact that we have some of that exchange happening and experiences where you get to wear the hat of a different stakeholder, that's what ultimately builds our ability to strengthen those bridges.
Awesome. Let me see here. Okay, I think if there's not any other thoughts on that, we can move to one of our wrap-up questions and get some final thoughts from folks here. And Allison, I'm going to go to you first, since I know you have a spot you need to jump to. Would you like to share a final thought about what you see as the impact of this work and what you're really hoping to help foster with it in the Central Iowa ecosystem?
Sure. I mean, I think just coming full circle really to where we started, we went through a 2-year rigorous process, 5 distinct stakeholder groups identifying, 3 areas that we felt like we could make an impact on. And it's sort of like when you go to, leave high school, you think you sort of know everything. And then you get to college and you realize you didn't really know anything at all. And then you leave college and you realize you really, really don't know anything at all. Same thing happened in this process, right? So you come out the other end and you graduate and you're like, well, wait a minute, we're just getting started. And so I think the consensus amongst this team was, we're just getting started and there's so much more that we can do, and we're people that generally like to do stuff, and so perhaps we could keep this thing rolling, and there's some other people that probably will emerge through efforts like the one that you're making here, that are perfectly willing to help, so that eventually when all of us are ready to step off into the next thing, that the train keeps rolling down the tracks.
Awesome. Thank you so much, and thank you for being on today.
Thank you.
And for everyone else, I'm curious to know, Diana mentioned at the beginning of the call that this work is, yes, focused on Central Iowa, but I'm curious to know what that might look like, in helping other regions start to do this work as, you continue and you kind of build capacity with the Central Iowa region. What opportunities do you all see for expanding the impact of this work?
Yeah, I can jump on because this is actually something that already has happened within the Iowa rural communities. They were really curious, actually, Sarah, because of some of your stories, like, what is this MIT REAP? What should we know about it as a smaller community of maybe under 5,000 or 3,000, or, just a couple hundred people. So there actually has been a lot of interest in different communities across Iowa. And so I don't know how many months back now, but I provided a presentation that essentially taught the MIT framework, without getting paid the MIT price, right? But, to these smaller communities so that they could understand, okay, how do you first assess your community for entrepreneurship? What does that really look like? And how do you talk to entrepreneurs, but also the five stakeholders together? But then how do you identify, these must-win battles that we have definitely focused on, or these different challenge areas, and every community looks different, of course. So that work is actually already happening. And honestly, because of your spotlighting of what has been happening, at least within our team here. But I absolutely think that there's a lot of people that can take this framework and apply it within their communities, whether that's the corporate community in which they operate in, or if it is the entrepreneur community. I think there's just many different ways to utilize this, and for the state to really see it as an opportunity to grow, because we do have some big challenges, like Nadilia mentioned. We're trying to find and invite those entrepreneurs that want to solve the problem too at the end of the day. And there's a lot going on in that sense too, in a lot of different industries and how they're going to change pretty quickly here. So we want to make sure too, when we're doing the work in the entrepreneur community, we're also always talking to the entrepreneurs, and we're always encouraging them to start businesses, to start again, or to land here in Iowa, and to really grow a business here, and making sure then if we did our job correctly, that means that we had all the right ingredients for them to be successful. So.
Absolutely. And one other final question, I'm curious what you see as the role for, like you said, you're not owning just entrepreneurship. This group isn't the only people who own entrepreneurship. So how would you all like to see that work, go into the community and have other people in the broader community and ecosystem get involved with it, and maybe give an idea of what that work will look like to the community, like what they can maybe expect to see.
So this goes way back again to something that the venture capitalist Brad Feld in his book Startup Communities. That you start with a big tent approach. Everybody is welcome if they think they can bring a solution to a known problem or a known gap. Bring them in, support them whichever way you can. let them succeed. Or if they're gonna fail, don't don't make them into an example, but help them through the start or the end of that process. So Big Tent is a first must do. So as this eShip coalition started, we didn't say who out of the group of 12 needs time off at this time, but who else wants in. And so several people raise their hands. So at this point, our job is to first support them and bring them along to all of the learning we had at the right cadence, and then help them find success in the verticals that they will carry. So like that one special news I alluded to earlier, the person who has been helping lead that effort has had Diana's support for a long time. As that particular initiative succeeds, we want to lift that person up as a member of the eShip coalition. They're not standing alone on an island. Similarly, just like within the state of Iowa, we also have resources that can be complementary from outside the state of Iowa. So Diehn and I have been talking about a potential problem and a solution for the last several weeks. And as I happen to be on a risk capital call with an upper Midwest region syndicate of investors, my question of them was, each of you is in a rural agriculture focused state. Here's the problem set. Have you encountered any entrepreneur in your region who has looked at this problem and found a solution? Most said no, one said maybe. And so we have another pathway to look through. So this is not going to be a journey we complete just with the population of Iowa. It's going to take internal and external focus to truly have an impact. Otherwise, we'll just keep spinning.
I am most grateful for the fact that there have been others that have gone before me in this journey. And I am immensely grateful that they have tried things and tested them, and some have worked and some have not. I like to think that I stand on the shoulders of giants, and I have now an opportunity to lift someone else into the next horizon. I'm not going to see the horizon. I'm painfully aware of our mortality. We're temporary, but the ability of then being that giant for someone else in the future is super important. I learned everything that I need to know about what it is to be in entrepreneurship from people that already did it, Tej being one of them, Diana being another. And I'm still learning what can be done to advance not only utilizing the expertise or the ideas that have been tested in other geographies, but creating something that works for us, for who we are, and whether that's regional elements, whether that is a focus on certain industries, whether that is a focus on what is in the horizon for us as a nation, in our spot in the world. All of these things cannot be done by individuals single-handedly. So for me, standing on the shoulder of giants is fantastic. And then I have to try to figure out what I can do to welcome others under this umbrella, because I'm not going to be around. We are not going to be around forever. And the ideas that we try or not try can help create that opportunity for the others that will come after us.
Wonderful. Any other final brief thoughts? Great. Thank you so much again to the members of eShip Co for joining me and sharing their story. And thank you to all of you who tuned in to learn more. All the content from this year's Innovation Iowa magazine is now available in print and online at innovationia.com. If you're interested in receiving news about innovations happening across the state throughout the year, you can sign up for the Innovation Iowa e-newsletter at businessrecord.com/signup. Thank you again for watching and have a good day.